in our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon. South Korea's domestically developed space launch vehicle is taking off in a few hours to make its second attempt at placing satellites into orbit. And a grim forecast for consumer prices this year, as the Bank of Korea says the country's inflation may top 4.7% in 2022, the highest in 14 years. In the sports arena, South Korean swimmer Hwang Sun-woo has won the silver medal in the men's 200-meter freestyle at the World Championships in Budapest. It's good to have you with us. This is the Daily Report, that is, for Tuesday afternoon, June 21st, here in capital Seoul. In a few hours, South Korea makes its second attempt at placing satellites into orbit using domestic technology. Earlier on this Tuesday morning, the Launch Management Committee announced that final preparations for liftoff, including the fueling of the rocket, would proceed as planned. The committee is slated to hold another meeting in about half an hour to decide on the precise time of NURI'S launch, which as of now appears to be 4 p.m. Korea Standard Time. Carrying with it 5 actual satellites and a 1.3-ton dummy, NURI will soar into the skies powered by 4 75-ton liquid fuel engines in its first stage and 1 75-ton liquid fuel engine in its second and 1 7-ton liquid fuel engine in its third. If successful, the launch will make South Korea the 7th country in the world independently capable of sending a satellite weighing that is over a ton into orbit using domestic technology. In this next report, my colleague Song Yoo-jin walks us through the events that are expected to take place once NURI takes off. Do take a look.
South Korea's first homegrown space rocket, NURI, will take off on Tuesday for what'll be its second launch. Attention is focused on whether South Korea will become the world's 7th country that can launch a satellite into orbit weighing more than a ton. But what happens once NURI is launched? The 200-ton vehicle is made up of 3 stages. The first, at the very bottom, will separate from the vehicle around 2 minutes after launch when it reaches 59 kilometers. The fairing, a shield that protects the satellites on board, will be deployed at around 4 minutes at an altitude of 191 kilometers. The Stage 2 rocket will break away at around 4.5 minutes, 258 kilometers above the Earth's surface. If everything goes as planned, NURI will reach its target altitude of 700 kilometers at 14 minutes and 57 seconds. Then the separation of the third stage will begin, starting with the 180-kilogram performance verification satellite. It's a new addition to the launch, as the first try last year only included a dummy. The satellite will also include 4 smaller cube satellites, which it will shoot out to orbit. This will be the first time in history for a satellite to shoot out another satellite. And finally, about 2 minutes later, the 1.3-ton dummy satellite will separate at the same altitude. It will take about half an hour to assess whether both satellites successfully parted from NURI. 송유진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the space industry appears to be doing its part in the globe's conservation campaign by reusing rockets, and South Korea has made a similar future pledge. Here's Chung Won-ju.
Falcon 9 is a reusable rocket designed and manufactured by SpaceX. Out of the 142 times it's been launched in the past decade, the Falcon 9 has succeeded in landing the first stage rocket 102 times and has been reused 82 times. Using a reusable rocket reduces launch costs by more than $7.7 million compared to using a new projectile. SpaceX's operations have expanded tenfold in the past decade, launching 30 rockets in the last year alone. The company also accounts for more than 60% of the global space launch vehicle market. Meanwhile, Europe's Arianespace, which once accounted for half of the commercial space launch vehicle market, has recently reduced its number of launches from 6 to 7 times a year to 3. Existing space launch vehicles can no longer compete against SpaceX. Subsequently, countries with advanced space technology are planning to develop new reusable launch vehicles before the year 2030.
Europe's Arianespace is also researching reusable launch vehicles to develop low-cost projectiles, and it seems that developing reusable projectiles is inevitable if countries that currently have advanced space technology are to maintain the commercial market to some extent.
South Korea's own launch vehicle, the NURI, which is set for its second launch, is not part of the commercial launch market as it is used to launch satellites into low orbit. The South Korean government has announced that it will develop launch vehicles that can handle larger payloads as well as reusable rockets as part of next-generation development projects that follow up on NURI.
The multi-stage combustion cycle method is used in developed countries and has high efficiency and adjustable reignition output. If applied to the first stage, reusing the projectile becomes possible, and if applied to the last stage, separating multiple satellites becomes possible.
A new space era is coming, and South Korea is hoping that the success of NURI's second launch will not only allow the country's launch vehicle technology to become completely independent, but also open up the possibility of entering the global commercial space launch market. 정은주, Arirang News.
Market insiders believe investing in the space industry is a lucrative bet. The industry is already estimated at some $340 billion, and South Korea is hoping to expand its share of that pie. Our Yoon explains.
A giant satellite antenna with a diameter of 27.4 meters is South Korea's National Registered Cultural Heritage number 436. In 1970, it became South Korea's first to provide satellite communications to 7 overseas countries. The Kumsan Satellite Service Center in Chungcheongnam-do Province, operated by domestic telecommunications firm KTSAT, has now grown into the largest of its kind in Asia with 45 giant antennas and 5 satellites. With a network that covers 60% of the world, KTSAT provides high-speed satellite data, broadcasting, and marine communications, and has launched a space data business that combines artificial intelligence with satellite data. KTSAT plans to establish a multi-orbit satellite communication network equipped with low-orbit satellites at an altitude of 500 kilometers, medium-orbit satellites, and geostationary satellites at an altitude of 36,000 kilometers that covers the entire world by 2030. A terrestrial network is sufficient for 5G, but satellite communication is essential for 6G, which transmits 125 gigabytes per second.
Construction of the 6G system itself uses both terrestrial and satellite networks. That's why, without building both together, it'd be difficult to have the communication services expected from 6G.
SK Broadband opened the Yeoju Satellite Center in Gyeonggi-do Province in 2017 to receive overseas broadcasts via satellite and use it as part of its IPTV service. The Yeoju Satellite Center has 1 antenna that is 11 meters wide and 4 antennas with a diameter of 6.4 meters. These antennas are also used for deep space exploration at a distance of more than 1 million kilometers. Equipped with a reflector that's 35 meters wide, the antennas will be in charge of ground equipment related to the lunar probe scheduled to be launched in August and Korean lunar orbiter deep space communication. The global space industry market is worth around $340 billion, but the size of South Korea's is only about $2.7 billion. As growth of the global space industry is expected to double over the next decade, South Korea is setting its sights on thoroughly preparing related businesses. 이은진, Arirang News.
And up next, we address prospects of NURI's second launch with a scholar who was with us last week to highlight the importance of safe and sustainable space explorations. I have Professor Michelle Hanlon at the University of Mississippi live on the line. Professor Hanlon, again, it's a pleasure to speak with you so soon after our first exchange last week.
Well, it's great. It's great to be back, and I'm very excited that they were able to get the rocket ready so quickly.
Right, me too, Professor Hanlon. Now, South Korea, though, it's poised to make the second attempt at putting satellites into space using domestically developed launch vehicle, which my colleagues have been highlighting throughout the program today. Do you envision a successful mission this time around, Professor Hanlon, or based on the experiences of other countries, do you suppose a few more attempts may be on the horizon?
I am ever the optimist. I have utter and complete faith in the scientists and engineers who put that rocket together and who have worked so hard to see that South Korea reach the heavens on its own power. But you have to also remember that what does success mean? When we think about success, success comes from failure, right? So we have to remember that every time we fail, we build on that failure. Again, think about how many times SpaceX failed. Think about when your children learn to walk, how many times they fall. Every time we fail, we learn something that helps us succeed even more and in ways that we never saw before. So I believe no matter what happens today, it's going to be a success because you're taking another step. These wonderful engineers at the Korean Space Agency are taking another step towards making sure that South Korea is able to take advantage of the new space economy.
Right, and staying with that optimism, Professor Hanlon, if successful, Korea will rank 10th in the world with regard to placing satellites into orbit and 7th for carrying payloads weighing up to 1,500 kilograms. What are the implications of this particular feat, do you think?
The implications are phenomenal. So when we think about the ability to place your own satellites where you want them, you don't have to hitch a ride with somebody anymore. You're not subject to the vagaries of politics or allies. You don't have to negotiate, with other countries about how much you're going to pay to send a payload up. You're going to be able to get those satellites where you want them, when you want them, exactly at the time you need them, point them in the right direction, and you'll be able to benefit all of South Korea, thinking about national security, about communications, about data about the earth, about agriculture, about weather. But it's so much more than that. By taking this step, by becoming another launch service provider, you're really opening up this gateway for humanity even more. And so this is really a feat. This is something that all of humanity is going to celebrate, because the more countries we have that are capable of helping other people get to space, the more we can get more humans out there to really understand and discover all the wonderful things of space that we can't even really begin to imagine at this point.
Right. Professor Hanlon, South Korea has invested some $1.8 billion in developing the NURI launch vehicle since 2010, from design to production to testing. What can you tell us about the size of this particular investment?
So when you look back at history, the Apollo missions cost $280 billion in today's money. So, we're not talking about putting people back on the moon, but space is a huge investment. But you know what? It's so much more. It's a down payment on the future. It's a down payment on the ability to build a space economy. Any country, I hate to say the words left behind, but the fact is, humanity relies so much on space, and that reliance is just going to grow and grow and grow in the coming years. And so to be able to invest and be part of that new space economy is going to be very important for the financial success of any nation. But I also think it's so much more than just economics. In 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin went to the moon, they took with them messages of peace from 74 nations around the world, and they left them there on the moon. And one of those messages was from Korean President Park Chung-hee. And his message said, he wrote, "This great achievement, landing on the moon, is a result of humanity's constant striving for progress towards a brighter destiny." And that is what South Korea is investing in, a brighter destiny for humanity.
Right, Professor Hanlon, thank you for those kind words. Now, in the long term, Professor, South Korea hopes to develop recyclable launch vehicles. How feasible are these hopes?
So I don't think it's feasible. I think it's necessary. In order to, when we talk about having a reusable rocket, we're talking about bringing down the costs of these launches. And so I can't afford, I think it's about $55 million if you want to get a ride on Dragon up to space station. I can't afford that, and a lot of people can't. But the more we are able to bring the cost of these launches down, and that's going to mean when we send these materials up on these rockets, we bring them back so we can reuse them and recycle them. That's going to bring the cost of those launches down. Also, think about the concept of recycling. That's a lot of material there, and we need to start really thinking. You introduced me as wanting to talk about space sustainability. We need to think about our environment and how we're using these materials. We don't want things burning up in our atmosphere all the time and contributing to climate issues. We want to be able to use these rockets over and over like we use buses or trains. And so I think it's we've seen it can be done. We've seen it with SpaceX. And so it's like I said, this technology is available and obviously has been proven. And so I think it's the way of the future.
Right. Professor, in recent years, there have been much interest in space mining. How do you explain this interest and what is the feasibility of this particular venture?
So space mining, I think, is one of the most exciting things we have to think about right now, because there's just so much out there that we don't know about. And we have two sort of thoughts of, we have the people who think, oh, I'm just going to go own a mine and, you know, be ridiculous and make trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't see it that way. I see space resources as having three very important roles for us. They can help us as we try to rebuild the health of our own Earth. We can move heavy industry off of Earth. We can start bringing back the elements we need. We might find elements we've never heard of before that will help us, you know, heat things more efficiently, or, you know, build spacecraft that are lighter. And it's also going to help us sustain communities in space, because we can't keep sending water to space every time we want to send humans to space. We need to find that water in space. And so when we talk about space mining, we're not just talking about like gold and diamonds. We're really talking about rare earth elements, about water, about helium-3, things that we need to survive in space and things that will help us survive and better humanity on Earth. The prospects of space mining are distant, but there are a lot of companies out there doing some very, very intense research to find those resources and to build the robots, initially robots, that will mine those resources and bring them back to us.
Right. And Professor Hanlon, like you mentioned, these ventures into space, amid these ventures into space, that is, some critics have been taking issue with space junk. Now, that being said, what efforts are being made to address this dangerous reality?
So the good news is people are actually focusing on the issue. So, for example, Vice President Kamala Harris of the United States said a few weeks ago, I think now, that the United States was no longer going to implement destructive ASAT tests, anti-satellite tests. The United States has self-imposed unilateral moratorium on creating more debris. But the issue is we need to get rid of the debris that's up there, in addition to not adding to it. So we had the Russian ASAT test last fall that added to that debris. The great news is there are a lot of companies that are working to figure out how to get that debris out of our orbit. And there are national governments, Japan and the EU, are putting national government money into those efforts. And we're hoping that we're going to get some national resources here in the United States also to address, again, removing that debris. It's really frightening because a piece of debris the size of a grain of sand can actually crack the windshield of a space shuttle or of the space station because they're whipping around the Earth at such incredible speeds. So this is a real issue. The United Nations is looking at it, and a lot of nations are looking directly at it, but we can certainly do more.
Right, we can. And finally, Professor Hanlon, let's end with perhaps a few words of advice from you with regard to ensuring sustainable space missions.
So I would just say, be responsible. We have learned a lot. And when we started this conversation, we talked about success and failure and how much we learned from our failures. We have learned a lot here on Earth about how to use resources, about the fact that resources are not finite. Space is infinite, but the space around us is not. And we don't know exactly what's out there or how we're going to be able to tackle it. So I would just say to everybody, to the engineers, I know the engineers at the Korean Space Agency are very responsible, but think about our responsibility to each other. We're stewards of this space, and we're stewards of the next to hold this space for the next generation. There's a lot of exciting stuff out there to be discovered. There's enough for everybody, and we need to make sure that we allow that and keep that accessibility and make sure that our exploration of space is sustainable, because that's the only way it will be successful.
Right, Professor Hanlon, who is also the co-director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi. Thank you very much for your time and your words.
Thank you so much.
Right, and on that note, we end part 1 of the Daily Report. We'll be back with part 2 in a few minutes. Do stay with us. Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we shed light on South Korea's music industry, ranging from BTS to K-TROT. For more, I have James Belmont, a freelance journalist based in London. James, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Tamar Herman with the South China Morning Post, who is currently in New York. Tamar, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
James, we'll start with you. Now, last week, BTS shared plans to briefly pause group activities and to pursue solo projects. Now, these plans were shared via a video of a dinner among the members celebrating their 9th anniversary. What are your thoughts on this manner of communication, so to speak?
I think it's great. This kind of news can be quite devastating to the fans, who are the most important people in this kind of situation. And I think when this news is presented in the form of a press release or a social media post, it can almost feel like a nail in a coffin. And by having this informal setting, it takes the sting out of the news that's being shared. And you can see that this is quite an emotional decision for them. You can see that they're also laughing with each other as well as sort of shedding a tear. So the fans can see from this that this decision hasn't come at the cost of their friendships. It's not left any bad blood. But I think in total, this is just a natural part of a modern band's life cycle. So I think that's reassuring. These people are growing up. They're developing passions for new things, and they deserve a bit of a break. So, and I think they seem very genuine about reforming down the line, and that's also a natural part of a band's life cycle. So, the fans can now look forward to things like the comeback album and the reunion shows, and in the meantime, hopefully some great music from the individual members.
Right, hopefully. Tamar, how do you respond to BTS's planned solo ventures and their potential impact perhaps on the group's future music aspirations as a team?
Yeah, I mean, if you watch the video, they were very clear the entire time that it's not the end of BTS. It's just kind of a break so that they can turn the focus towards both individual growth and also artistic growth. They've been working really hard for a really long time, going forward really fast without any time to really kind of sit down and develop their art and their craft and just kind of mature. One of the members said, we've been doing this for so long, and we wake up and we go get our makeup done, and then we're just keep going the whole day. Like, when do we get settled, and when do we kind of get to ruminate on that, and ruminate on who we are and what we're doing? And so I think there's only good that can really come out of this on the artistic side of things. And I think it'll take some time to figure out kind of what BTS is moving forward at this point. Like, the group is still active. They're promoting the Busan World Expo bid. They keep on doing things and keep on posting, and the members keep on saying, this is being wildly blown out of proportion as a disbandment, which is not. So it's quite interesting to see. I know we're going to get I believe it's J-Hope's album is going to be the first one to drop, I imagine, before his Lollapalooza performance coming up soon. So it's going to be interesting to see how they manage this and what comes out of it. But I, for one, am excited to see what artistic growth comes out of it.
Right. And meanwhile, against that backdrop, James, some pundits believe BTS's absence as a group in the music scene may perhaps serve to offer other K-pop stars their time under the limelight. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, BTS are the kind of shining stars of the K-pop industry on a global level. And I think, when you've got, for example, overseas fans, BTS is so synonymous with K-pop that sometimes the artists in the sidelines can be overlooked. And if BTS are taking a bit of a step back, then that, it sort of serves a level playing field for other artists to take the opportunity to show their own creativity. And I think that's, the world is watching to see what comes next. So there's loads of opportunity there. And I think this is an exciting new chapter in the K-pop music industry.
Right, a new chapter. I would have to agree with that. And in the meantime, Tamar, I have something to ask you. I understand you wrote a book on BTS titled BTS Blood, Sweat and Tears. Could you first tell us a bit about that particular book and how you got to start writing it?
So I've been a journalist for several years now, and throughout my career, I've been covering for outlets like Billboard and Forbes BTS's rise. So as they kept rising, we felt like it was time to write a book. So in August 2022, BTS Blood, Sweat, and Tears came out. It looks at the history of the group. It has some music criticism. It has some essays about just why BTS, what's going on, what does this all mean for everybody. It's quite beautiful. So it's a really gorgeous book. It has a really nice cover and really great photos and everything. But I think it just, we always talk about all the time, like BTS making records and BTS, keep on going and making releases and just keep on being the superstars that they are. But there's not really a whole lot of conversation about why BTS or what it is that goes into BTS to kind of make them click. So I kind of spent 75,000 words writing about this, and I still am having thoughts about it. So it tells you quite a bit about the subject matter.
Right, and staying with that then, Tamar, could you tell us a bit about what you believe is behind BTS's phenomenal success?
So like I just said, I wrote over many, many words, tried to kind of put my finger on that. And I think it really breaks down to mostly the relatability. The thing that makes great art or great pop art something that people love and very accessible is that it's something that anybody can engage with. And wherever you are in the world, you can listen to their music or watch the band interact with each other or engage with their social media or any of the stories that they're telling. And it's very relatable to so many people. So I think that's ultimately what makes a voice of a generation. We always have these pop acts that really kind of are larger than life for a reason. And I think that BTS has that reason.
Right. And beyond BTS, James, now you wrote an amazing piece on Korea's 트로트, a rather colorful music genre that goes back to the beginning of the 20th century and is largely linked to our older generation, including my father, bless him. Now, firstly, what prompted your interest in 트로트, James?
Well, it's actually fairly recent. I was actually sat right here in London a few months ago, and I received an email from a Korean record label called Beasts and Natives Alike. And the email was to announce the new album, the debut album of a Korean producer called 250. And 250's actually worked with BTS in the past. He's written beats for some of their singles. And 250's album takes influence from K-TROT. And as the email described it, K-TROT was this century-old genre of music from Korea that was apparently mostly only popular with the older generation. And immediately I thought that was really interesting. There was this, relatively young artist putting his own spin on a genre of music that I didn't at the time know much about, that was apparently fairly untrendy, and he's making it cool again. And I was really interested, and I actually came to Korea to find out more. I spoke to lots of really interesting people, and I kind of found K-TROT music wherever I walked around. I found it in, I heard it in the food market stalls. I saw the CDs in the secondhand music shops, and I even saw it on TV, like Lim Young-woon, as we've just been seeing on the video there. And what was really interesting in Seoul was that everyone seemed to have not only a different opinion of the music, but also a different definition of what it was. And I think that's what made it really interesting, this project, because there's so much history and variety and different meanings to different people. And I found that really fascinating.
Right, and staying with that, Tamar, strictly speaking, within your capacity as a foreign listener whose exposure to 트로트 would most likely have come after your encounter with K-pop, what are your thoughts on the tunes of 트로트?
To be honest, actually, ever since I became a K-pop fan, I was familiar with K-TROT because I became a fan around 2009. And at that point, there was kind of a K-TROT resurgence with groups like Super Junior making Rococo and a few other acts. Hong Jin-young's Love Battery came out that same year. So there was a resurgence of K-TROT about over a decade ago now that I was quite familiar with. So I've been quite familiar with it. It always felt kind of like the alternative to pop music. It's a little bit more cheery, a little sometimes. People kind of, you think at first glance is kind of cheesy and maybe, like, as people say, like a little bit for an older generation. But once you hear it and you really kind of get it, it really resonates with you. It really kind of, you feel it, and you hear a K-TROT song and you want to either sing along to it or clap to it or cry to it. So I think that it's something that I'm quite familiar with. But I think more and more people, because of K-pop artists either delving into K-TROT or because the industry is now having focus on like TV shows with K-TROT stars and just the charts, you see more and more K-TROT just mostly Yoon. I think that there is more integration that's happening, but the integration has kind of already been happening for over a decade now. So I think there is some familiarity. It's just kind of still, it's a different market than maybe the average K-pop fan.
Right, it really is a different market. Now, James, TROT, like you covered in your article, it's gaining quite a fan base among young Koreans as well. How do you explain this trend?
Yeah, well, I think what's really interesting is it's coming from a couple of different avenues. Like we just described, there's TV shows like Mr. Trot and Miss Trot, and that's kind of, performing covers of traditional trot songs. It's maybe a more mainstream audience, and it's, therefore becoming quite a big industry and has been for some time. But there's also artists like 250, who I was just describing, who are perhaps more of a left field, working in more of a left field area and putting new creativity into the genre, which is quite, for lack of a better word, quite a cool way to put a spin on it. And so regardless of which avenue people are reaching trot through, I think the root of it is this sort of global phenomenon of nostalgia for fashion and style and music from previous generations, and this culture of looking back to take influence and create something new. And I think in music, there's a really good example in the West at the moment. We've talked about BTS, but in the UK, it was always One Direction with a big pop band. And the singer Harry Styles has just released a new album. It's called Harry's House. And he's taken influence from a Japanese artist called Harumi Hosono, who in 1973 released an album called Hosono House. And, Harry Styles' album is in the charts now, and that's quite an unconventional way for a Japanese artist from the 70s to get back into the charts. So I think what I'm saying is, if the BTS members are going solo now and they take a shining to trot, then, who knows, it could be right back at the top of the charts then and reach an overseas audience in quite a big way.
Right, and staying with that then, Tamar, do you see TROT making greater inroads into the Western music market, perhaps?
I'm laughing for a little bit because James just reminded me that when Big Bang was at their peak a few years ago, one of the members, Daesung, actually did release trot music. That was like kind of his thing as a soloist. So if BTS members, I think it'd be quite entertaining. I think beyond that, I think trot is kind of still a novelty genre, but again, they're, like James said, Harry's House, you are having kind of this look back towards the past of pop from maybe genres or regions or just artistic backgrounds that maybe people around the world aren't really so familiar with, and they are kind of leaning into that. We saw a few years ago that the Japanese 1980s-ish genre city pop really kind of took off, and it's still going really strong. There's a huge subgenre of city pop kind of having a revitalization. So I don't really think that trot may be for everybody, but I think there could be a sizable portion of music listeners definitely who are kind of looking at it to see kind of this, what is going on, and revitalize it for the present as we are seeing other genres happening to other genres.
Right, well, that is good to know. All right, Tamar, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And James over in London, thank you as well for being with us today.
Thank you.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has subtly shared his opposition to the Democratic Party's calls for the disclosure of intelligence regarding the killing of a South Korean man by North Korean military in the northern side of the inter-Korean sea border back in the year 2020. Responding to a related question earlier on this Tuesday morning, Mr. Yoon said the disclosure of such information was not a simple matter. Earlier this month, the Yoon administration rejected the former Moon administration's claims of defection by the South Korean man, which his family has denied from the start. Separately, during Tuesday's weekly cabinet meeting, the president called for prompt reform of public institutions. He also pressed for intensive adjustments to government expenditures. Current inflation here in the local front stands at its highest in 14 years, and the central bank believes prices will soar even higher amid geopolitical challenges and weather conditions. Our Kim Yeon-seung reports.
prices of goods and services this year have risen as much as during the 2008 financial crisis. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, consumer prices from January to May rose 4.3% on year, similar to the inflation rate seen during the global financial crisis 14 years ago. However, analysts at the central bank are projecting even greater increases for June, surpassing May's 14-year high figures. The increases come on the back of global geopolitical and climate-related events, including Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has driven up oil prices, and dry weather, which has resulted in a hike in grain prices.
The supply-side effects are showing up as price and wage increases. Also, with social distancing lifted, inflationary pressure on the demand side has also increased.
Higher demand for dining and processed foods has pushed up the price of some food items as well. And with that in mind, the Bank of Korea is concerned over agflation, when food prices rise faster than other costs.
In particular, the agflation phenomenon caused by rising international food prices is likely to continue for a long time due to its downward, rigid and persisting characteristics.
Meanwhile, core inflation, which doesn't count volatile food and energy prices, jumped above 3% in April and May. The Bank of Korea has forecast that there may be more price rises to come. And with the risk of recession in the U.S. looming large, domestic and international markets may become even more erratic than they are now. The Bank of Korea says that they will rely on data and numerous forms of indices to keep their monetary policies flexible and adaptable in a risky economic climate. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the country's exports fell over 3% during the first 20 days of June. According to the Korea Customs Service on this Tuesday, outbound shipments amounted to some $31.3 billion, down 3.4% on year. Imports, on the other hand, jumped by 21.1% to record $39 billion. Accordingly, the country noted a trade deficit of around $7.6 billion, which officials are linking to escalating oil prices and global supply chain disruptions. Exports to neighboring China plunged 6.8%, but exports of semiconductors expanded 2% and that of petroleum products soared 88%. Seoul's top economy and finance official has outlined the government's first set of policies for the housing market. They include a host of tax-related incentives for both landlords and tenants. Jung explains.
The Yoon Suk-yeol administration's first package of measures on the property market aims to stabilize rental housing costs to ease the burden on tenants. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho, during his first government meeting on the property market on Tuesday, said there'll be tax incentives to encourage the renewal of housing contracts.
Landlords who voluntarily raise rent by less than 5% will be exempt from capital gains tax when selling their homes if they own just one home.
Those landlords who raise rental prices by less than 5% will also get the special tax deduction for owning a property for a long term, even if they have lived in their property for less than 2 years if they sell that property. Also, the government plans to ease the burden on tenants under the country's unique 전세 rental agreement that uses a huge lump sum deposit instead of monthly rent.
Considering the rise in prices of jeonse for the last 4 years, the government will increase the maximum home rental loan amount for tenants.
For jeonse tenants, tax deductions for the repayment of home rental loans will be expanded, with the ceiling being extended from the current 3 million won to 4 million won, or about $3,000. For tenants who pay monthly rent, the tax credit rate on rent will be raised from the current 12% to a maximum of 15%. Also, to get more people on the property ladder, the government will exempt first-time buyers from up to 2 million won, or about $1,500 of acquisition tax. The government is to come up with reforms on comprehensive real estate tax by next month and lay out detailed plans on how to supply 2.5 million homes by mid-August. 엄지영, Arirang News.
And as mentioned during our panel discussion, BTS continues to support South Korea's bid to host the 2030 World Expo in the southern port city of Busan. Now, this is according to Prime Minister Han Duck-soo over in France, where he is promoting the country's bid at the General Assembly of the agency in charge of supervising World Expos. Mr. Han told reporters that BTS members will continue to serve as ambassadors, a role they accepted just days after sharing intentions to pursue solo projects. Former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon is throwing his weight also behind Busan's bid. Mr. Han is set to deliver the city's official presentation on Tuesday. The Prime Minister is accompanied on the trip by SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won and Busan Mayor Park Hyung-jun. In Budapest, South Korean swimmer Hwang Sun-woo is bringing home the silver medal from the 200-meter freestyle at this year's World Championships. Our Kim Yo-sun has more on his performance and prospects.
South Korea's Hwang Sun-woo has won the silver medal in the men's 200-meter freestyle at the World Swimming Championships held in Budapest. Hwang finished the race in 1 minute 44.47 seconds, setting a new South Korean record and a new personal best. The 19-year-old swimmer finished second, with 1.26 seconds behind Romania's David Popovici. 2020 Olympic champion Tom Dean of Britain won the bronze medal. With this, Hwang became only South Korea's second swimmer to pick up a medal at the biannual event, following Park Tae-hwan's 400-meter golds in 2007 and 2011 and 200-meter bronze in 2007. Hwang also became the fourth Asian swimmer to stand on the 200-meter freestyle podium at the championships. His next race at the event is the men's 100-meter freestyle preliminary, slated for Tuesday afternoon local time. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. With airline passengers departing from Hungary expecting higher ticket prices, Budapest is investigating Ryanair for passing the costs of a windfall tax on to customers. This comes as ticket prices have risen by some $10 to $26 as airlines face an annual windfall tax of $78.9 million imposed by Budapest over extra profits earned during the pandemic. Low-cost carriers have criticized the levy, calling it, quote, unjustified and saying that it damages tourism. The government says the windfall tax may go on for as long as 2 years. 70 to 80,000 Belgian workers took to the streets of Brussels on Monday, calling on the government to handle skyrocketing living costs. The protests saw transport systems come close to a standstill as demonstrators held strikes at Brussels airport, forcing the cancellation of all departing flights, while also halting bus services nationwide. The protests follow an inflation spike of 9% in June for the country as Russia's invasion of Ukraine impacted supplies. Meanwhile, the Belgian Prime Minister said Belgian workers are faring better than their EU counterparts due to their wages being indexed to inflation. 2 people were killed in a helicopter crash in northern England on Monday. The crash in North Yorkshire is already being investigated by the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, with officials trying to determine whether the crash was caused by either a mechanical malfunction or pilot error. Reports have said that the helicopter came down in a field near the village of Burton in Lonsdale shortly after takeoff. According to authorities, no one else was on board the flight. 11 people were rescued during a 6-hour operation after a technical glitch caused a cable car to stop in mid-air in India's Solan district. According to rescue officials on Monday, the tourists from Delhi were stranded between 600 to 1,500 meters in the air at the Parwanu Timber Trail. Rescuers were able to bring the tourists to safety after attaching another trolley to reach the stuck cable car. The state government has ordered a probe into the incident. And this comes after a similar incident in April, where a cable car collision killed 2 and left almost 50 people trapped in mid-air in India's eastern Jharkhand state. Turning back to Belgium, as authorities have returned a gold-capped tooth of the Congolese independence hero Patrice Lumumba. The return was made official in a ceremony in Brussels on Monday. According to family members, the return was only made possible by taking legal action. The tooth is Lumumba's last known remains. Elected as the Democratic Republic of the Congo's first democratic president in 1960, the 35-year-old was in office for 3 months and was killed in 1961 by a firing squad, with claims that his body was dismembered and dissolved in acid. The return of the relic follows Belgium's King Philippe expressing his deepest regret earlier this month for the country's abuses of its African former colony. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Tuesday afternoon. Another stifling, scorching day with this morning's heat alerts further expanded across the country. And there's even a heat warning for parts of Gyeongsang-Buk-do province, so it shouldn't be taken lightly. And it's very important to abstain from high-energy activities or unnecessary outdoor work and ensure you drink lots of fluids to avoid heat-related illnesses. And with the low-pressure system getting weaker, rain tapered off on Jeju this morning. However, parts of Jeollanam-do and Gangwon-do provinces will have showers of 5 to 40 millimeters later this afternoon, which could come with blustery or stormy conditions. Meanwhile, in Gohung, Jeollanam-do province, the space rocket NURI is scheduled to be launched at 4 p.m. at the Naru Space Center. Skies will be murky with slight wind, but overall, the weather looks pretty good. There should be no more delays, but we'll keep you updated if anything changes. And the sweltering hot weather will take a brief break as a stationary front gets stronger again from Thursday, which means with heavy rain is on the way. So please be extra careful if you're out and about and take steps to protect against damage from heavy downpours. Now let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
Well, that is all from us at this hour, but do stay tuned to the station for our special coverage on NURI'S launch. Thank you for watching.